even Preston Nichols
Mm-hmm.
says he remembers the guy, Whitemore.
Right.
Several times he's met him, he's spoke with him and discussed the actual projects being run out of Montauk.
Well, and
And
just, yeah, go
yeah,
ahead. I'm sorry.
yeah, sorry. This was before I even gave a description of what Whitemore looked like. I only gave his name up until a certain point, and Preston Nichols came forward with a description, and I just couldn't believe it. Yeah, that was Whitemore at that time.
Preston's told several interviewers about stories of their abductions in the U.S. of children, what we have, and it's not funny, but I guess euphemistically called milk carton kids,
Yeah.
going back to the 70s, and street abductions of intended subjects for Montauk. Some of these subjects did not survive the experiments at Montauk. Some of them were basically put into the trip chair and did not return. Did you
Mhm.
have similar parallel systems in
Yeah.
Britain? Yeah.
Unfortunately, that was the negative side of things. A lot of people were brought into the facility. Some were okay after being experimented on. They went about their business. Unfortunately, there were a percentage that did not. They came in, but they did not go out. Yeah.
So there's enormous overlap between all of these Western intelligence agencies. They're basically collaborating and running parallel programs. I want to go into the bases a little bit at this point because it
Hmm.
kind of dovetails into this. We have reports around the world, and you've been inside of at least one of them that I know of, underground bases running operations. Many of the operations seem to entail collaboration not only with Western powers, intelligence agencies, and military, but off-world beings as well. Can you give me a little bit of background on that?
Yeah. Well, again, I can only speak about the Peasemore facility. I don't know enough information regarding any other underground facilities, so I'll
Right.
base it on
But we
Peasemore.
have other witnesses that have, so
Yeah.
your testimony is simply part of that overall picture.
Okay. Well, at Peasemore, yes, there was an interaction with off-planet intelligence, so working hand in hand with an OPI. Peasemore, it ran several different projects. The mind control and manipulation program, the genetics, and of course how should I put it? The creation of those program life forms. I mean,
Cyborgs?
well, they're to all intents and purposes they look like small greys,
Okay.
but these things can be literally controlled and programmed. Um, they would have been used in. I mean, what's his name? Dr. Stephen Greer mentions stagecraft in a number of his
Yes,
interviews.
yes.
He even mentions the PGs as well, the program life forms. Now, yeah, I've worked with these things. It was part of my job to go around the base, making sure the security around those was total, help shipping them out to various other facilities and bases. So, yeah, I do know about the PGLs.
Okay. Um, I've had a number of conversations over hours, and we've had some common conversations as well with James Horak. And James
Mhm.
has insisted that the grays, as we call them, are what the military has termed and what he continues to term EBs, extra biological entities. Is there a distinction between extra biological entities and actual grays as being distinct? Is there a race of grays? Are they all, I guess, what we would call biomechanical in some sense? What knowledge do you have about
Yeah,
that, Barry?
yeah, that's a bit tricky because, to my knowledge, there are three races of greys.
Okay.
Now, the distinction between EBE and a grey, that's a very fine line. I'm not sure whether I want to actually cross that, but certainly I do know uh, There are the drones, the worker greys that are controlled by another species. There's the taller greys that are very benign, very compassionate. EBEs, yeah, maybe. I really don't want to go into areas where others have more experience.
I understand that, yeah. And by the way, we're getting a lot of distortion on the line right now, but that's okay. Just for the listeners, so you know, we're on Skype and it's an international line, so you're going to get some background noise on this as well. Going back to Peasemore for a while, you worked at Peasemore when, Barry?
Yeah, that was July 79 till January 81.
What was your capacity there?
Officially, security enforcement officer.
Okay.
Unofficially, probably dog's body. I was not only making sure that all the guinea pigs that came in were secured, but I was also one of the guinea pigs. In fact, all the security staff were. They were all tagged, they were all chipped, and a number were experimented on as well.
During that time, you had an encounter with a being. You stepped into a situation where you were, I guess, out of boundaries and had an encounter with a reptilian. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, there's not too much to tell, obviously, because it was all over in no time. But yeah, I had wandered off my intended security route for that day. And it was, looking back now, it's pretty strange because you would normally get a warning on your radio and it would come over the tannoy system as well that officer so-and-so is in the wrong place and to retrace your steps. But none of that happened. Mind you, it was only a fleeting thing anyway. Yeah, walking around a certain part of the facility, I just turned the corner and literally, bang, there was this very tall being with a suit either side. And that really did throw me. I had a quick look. I looked up. They looked down. I got some very bad looks from the two suits. I shouldn't have been there. And I hightailed it back to where I should have been.
What distinguished this being as a reptilian to you, Barry?
Well, firstly, the sheer size of the thing, and when I tried to describe it, I mean, up until that time, I'd only experienced greys. There were OPI in that facility. Your typical small grey with the very large eyes. Yeah, they were around the facility now and again, but this was the first time I'd ever seen anything like this, and it really threw me. I mean, it was well over 6 foot tall, probably 6'6", very broad, very menacing. I did get a very menacing feeling from this thing.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you that because obviously you're an intuitive, and I suspect that you read situations even just subconsciously as you walk into something like that. Time kind of collapses a little bit, but your initial read on it was one that this was a being that was not to be taken lightly.
Oh yeah, you wouldn't want to mess with that. Yeah, it was just wow, you know. Oh my God, what the hell is this? And yeah, just it's something you wouldn't want to mess with.
Do you get the sense that the reptilians may in fact be part of the hierarchy that's collaborating with intelligence and military in these projects?
That's been put to me a number of times over the years, and there's a good likelihood that is the case. I mean, every time I try to approach my associates with certain questions, they always seem to steer the conversation away. Or when I've been given files and documents to look through, there's always certain areas that are either missing or they've been blanked out. So I'm not privy to everything they put down on the desk. But yeah, it wouldn't surprise me at all if they're pulling the strings.
Were there there were obviously military officers at this particular place you stumbled into?
Well, Peasemore itself was, you had a lot of USAF personnel there. You had the suits walking around, which were usually NSA, but you had other agencies there.
Hmm.
It was part of my job to actually escort certain individuals around on tours. And I do recall on one occasion when I had to escort some officials from the United States around the facility. And afterwards, when the reports of the day were put into the office, I was pulled to one side and told they weren't too happy in being shown around by a Brit. So,
That was their
so
problem?
that
Wow.
was their problem. Yeah.
Wow. That's amazing. The reason I ask you that is because I've had Bob Dean on, and Bob's told me in no uncertain terms, both private conversation and on mic, that he's been to the Pentagon and that he's verified that there are, in fact, uh, off-planet beings who are operating at the Pentagon itself. And I always like to get overlapping witnesses to corroborate this, just because I think people find this to be so incredible.
Hmm. Oh, well, this is it. I mean, all of this is incredible and unbelievable to your average Joe. They're going to listen to this and think, that guy's off his nut.
Hmm.
But yeah, these things are out there. They are happening. These projects exist. These beings exist. All these things exist. But trying to convince your average Joe public, it's almost impossible. They just think you're off your rocker.
How aware are you of any potential treaties that were created by governments enabling off-planet beings to abduct and use subjects? And I'm speaking specifically here in my sphere of knowledge regarding the US, the UK, and Canada, which is obviously part of the UK as well.
Hmm.
In the United States, we have the legendary Great Treaty, which nobody's ever hard confirmed, but there seems to be an abundance of evidence that some kind of treaty was crafted with, I guess you would call them, the negative off-planet beings sometime in the 1950s in an exchange for technology in order to allow abductions to occur.
Yeah, well, that I think is pretty well embedded within the research community. We all know about that particular treaty, what it entailed. I would go along with that because I can't disprove it. I've seen documentation at the MOD in London that seems to corroborate the British side of that, where a similar treaty was set up around 1960,
Okay.
where the UK officials allowed a certain percentage of its citizens to be experimented on in return for technology. So yeah, I can sort of go along with that.
Okay, so you at least have eyes on, because obviously, talking to Bob Dean, he was exposed in, I think, 1962 when he was stationed in Europe
Hmm.
at European Command in Europe with NATO, talking about documents that he had seen as well. And
Hmm.
I think this is important too for the listeners to understand that while we don't have hard copy proof of any of these documents, there's a persistence of evidence that continues to be piling up that our governments did this. And personally, this just pisses me off to no end because so many people were caught up in these particular projects, citizens going about their lives who were intruded upon by permission of governments in exchange for this technology, which they've also clearly suppressed. And I guess that gets my bitch out of the way, but it also goes to another level of the whole conversation, Barry.
Hmm.
The technology itself, including the, I guess you would call it, free energy, 0 point energy transfers that occurred, and the fact that this energy is being deployed by military and intelligence agencies around the world.
Hmm. Um, well, let's see. I'll tackle this in a certain way, in a certain format, if I can.
Okay. Do go where you're comfortable.
Yeah.